So back when I was a kid, my dad was a journalist and he was shooting with Minolta cameras. And later he got a Canon camera. So obviously when I bought my first camera in 2000, it had to be a Nikon camera, obviously. And I was shooting with Nikon for about 20 years, almost, throughout all of the aspiring part of my photographic journey career. And so Nikon cameras really have a soft spot in my dead mechanical heart, and they probably always will have, even though I've switched to Fujifilm. So when Nikon announced the ZF, I was really intrigued because this was so much the camera that I always wanted. Back in 2004, I think they announced the FM3A. And I was like, A? Are we gonna get a D as well? Digital FM. But we never got one. They gave us a DF later, but it was nothing like an FM body. And now we have the ZF, and it's really much an FM body in so many ways. But is it really? It looks like it. But every time I had the chance to pick one up, I've been a little bit disappointed in a way. Mostly because the camera looks so nice. I mean, in pictures it looks so much like a classic Nikon SLR. But when you pick it up, there's a bit of a disconnect in a way. The whole top part of the camera looks like a classic SLR camera. You have these beautiful dials and everything is metal, brass and stuff like that. And then you turn the camera around to look through the viewfinder and the experience changes. It's not like it gets ruined, it just changes into this typical mirrorless situation. It's not necessarily bad, but it's just not what I had expected. I had expected something more like more of an analog feel. I know it's always going to be digital. You're always going to have a digital viewfinder, and you're always going to have a screen. Typically, you have a screen. Hello? Hej. So that was another screen grasping for my attention, sorry. So the reason I want to compare the ZF and the E5 is because they're both sort of fighting for my attention. They're in the same price range. They've sort of wandered into the same price range. The Nikon was more expensive 2 years ago. Now it's come down to the same price as the X-E5. So I think when I'm looking at a camera with this idea of having an everyday camera, and I'm looking at either of them, I think it's obvious to look around and see what else you can get in this price range, and they both pop up. Obviously, you could compare the ZF to Fuji's X-T series, and that would make a lot more sense. I don't know, just not in my book. I shoot them, so it's not like I don't like them, but I consider them sort of work cameras. I don't have any really rational reasoning behind that. So when I'm comparing the ZF to the X-E5, the most obvious difference between those two are obviously the viewfinder, because I was gonna say the X-E5 doesn't have one, but it doesn't have a viewfinder hump, so it only has this tiny hole. And there's no arguing, the Nikon ZF does have the best viewfinder in this regard. And while the Fuji X-E5 loses this battle big time with the viewfinder, it's still not bad enough that it would be a deal breaker to me. So I think when comparing the X-E5 and the ZF in sort of this how they operate, they are really night and day difference. And I do feel a little bit blindsided by the Nikon's very heavy emphasis on the dials and the Nikon, because usually when you have these dials, the shutter speed and the exposure compensation and the ISO and stuff like that, then you just normally think that you have a simple camera. You have a camera where you can control all the necessary stuff with external dials. And that's usually the case with Fuji cameras. It's only really the X8 cameras where you need to set up a lot of stuff to have it function the way you want it to be. Most other Fuji cameras you can just pick up and spend an hour learning, and then you really understand it, and you don't need to do a lot of stuff. You have all of that. Then you can sort of dive into this mindset that you only really need the shutter speed, aperture, ISO, and just to select a few other settings that you like. But with the Nikon, it feels like It's more like this modern camera where you need to chimp everything all the time. For example, the autofocus is super complex in a good way, because it's a really good autofocus system, but it's also complex. You need to understand it to use it well. You need to understand what kind of tracking systems are good for specific situations and stuff like that. And obviously, yes, when you have the camera for some time, you'll learn all of this and it will become second nature. But I still think that there's an argument to be had in just keeping it simple. And I think Nikon is really doing a bad job here. And I think bad enough that it's just throwing me off this less is more kind of mindset. But that's not to say that it's a bad camera, it's just not for me or what I'm looking for in this specific camera. But the Nikon camera is extremely, it is extremely complex, and it is extremely good in this sort of workhorse kind of way, if you know what I mean. So yes, if you are a Nikon user, this is a great camera. But if you own another system and you're just curious about this one everyday kind of camera, I think it's not for me. So I don't know if it's for you, but it's not for me at least. When I imagine this everyday carry camera, one of the most important things is build quality, material quality, and just how durable it is, and also the looks. And that sounds like I want something that is designed nice, but it has more to do with how it looks after 5 years of usage. It can look good if it's plastic. I don't mind plastic, but it has to be plastic that doesn't try to be metal. That's usually a mistake, and when you don't have a camera that looks like it's a sharp-edged metal camera, but in reality it's plastic, then the paint is gonna look weird and it's gonna look cheap and worn out in a cheap way. Where if it's an actual metal construction, then it will just start to look nicer and nicer and nicer. That's something Fujifilm usually understands pretty well. Something Nikon doesn't always do really well. On the flip side, Nikon do construct some really nice plastic bodies. So what I'm trying to say is that I don't mind the plastic bodies that are intended to be thick plastic tough cameras like a Nikon F4 or Canon. I don't know which one of them are made of plastic, but some of them are made of plastic, and I don't really mind because they have a design that doesn't scream they are metal. They have this futuristic design. I wouldn't be surprised if they're plastic. But with this camera, I think Nikon leans so much into this vintage feel that it does surprise me and disappoint me a little bit that the bottom plate and the back sort of situation, it's all plastic. The front part as well, it's only the top part and the dials, but the dials are really some of the nicest dials out there, and that's just contradicting the whole idea. I think they persuade people with the super nice dials, and then the rest of the camera doesn't really follow up on that, and that's just weird in my opinion. And it becomes a disappointment in the end. The Fuji X-E5 is a camera that's so new that it's too early to say if it has a long durability. I think it does. It feels like a premium camera. It feels like a camera that where you get a lot for the price of it in terms of body construction. So I know that all sounds like a bit of a diss on the ZF, and it is maybe in my opinion, but it's not to say that the ZF is a bad constructed camera. It does feel like a brick, and it does feel like it's tough. It won't break on you. So that's not really my problem with the plastic. One reason to compare the ZF and the X-E5 is because they both have this emphasis on manual control dials, nice dials. I think both of these two cameras take it up a notch. Nikon is trying to evoke this feeling of nostalgia. I'm thinking of my F3 when I turn the dials, and I get this sort of the same clickety-click thing with the dials. And with the Fujifilm, it's more like a modern, nice touch. I don't really get any direct resemblance with any vintage cameras, but it just feels nice. And it feels like you're in control when you hold it and you touch the dials. I did have one problem, and that's the lock on the dials. It locks the position in place. If you move it over T, B, 1/3 of stops or whatever, then it will lock. In my mind, that's just not intuitive. I control this dial with my finger, and often when I have the camera up to my eye, I'm not necessarily looking at it. So when I'm changing the shutter speeds, all of a sudden the camera just locks up, and that's a bit annoying. And even though I would probably get used to it, it's just an unnecessary hindrance. It would be a lot smarter to just have it as a lock, exactly like Fujifilm does, where you just lock it wherever you want to lock it. So the Nikon's video features are really good, but I think Nikon is making a little bit of a mistake not trying to take a direction. They could either lean more into the video features or not take them away, but make them have less of an impact on how the body is shaped in a way. So that flip out screen, for example, it's only there because it makes it into a hybrid camera, and it appeals to people who also want to do video. And I think that's a bit of a mistake. I don't really hate this kind of screen, but I think when you have a flip out screen, then you are signaling that you have a video capable camera. And if you just look at the core specs of the Nikon Zf, you do have a video capable camera. It's not really straightforward to use as a video camera. In all the time I had it, I could never figure out how to shoot at 48th of a second, which is like my go-to setting because I shoot 24p, and I'm sure it's in there somewhere, but I couldn't find it. It's not intuitive to get there. And it's a lot like that with the video features of this camera body. They are there, but they're not intuitive. But they're also not hidden away. So they still impact how the body looks and feels in a way where it drags it down a little bit. While I said that I don't mind flip out screen, I don't like this flip out screen because it feels like it's attached to the body. It's a module on an otherwise really beautiful camera, and that's just a shame, I think. Where on a lot of Fuji cameras it's flushed with the body. If this camera, or if a future ZF camera were to appeal to me in a broader sense, they would have to take a big step in one direction. And it can be every direction, really. I would love a smaller one that feels a lot more like an FM3 size-wise and weight-wise, because this camera is not that at all. It's a lot bigger. It looks like an FM, but it's more like having a brick on your shoulder. So I would love a camera that goes in that direction and just shaves off a lot of this digital jimping. Give us an opportunity to just use the exposure triangle and obviously have access to all the other goods, but they're not essential to be kept on the outside of the body. Another solution could be to have a more ZF Pro kind of body, one that goes all in with the metal feel, one that has a fully metal construction and not the plastic button and back of the camera and even front. So one that goes all in this aspect would be another way to grab my attention, I think.